Now, before I start this week's show, I'd just like to say a quick thank you to our podcast sponsor, Fidelity International. Now, Fidelity are one of the best known investment platforms out there, and they're also a global fund manager responsible for around £320 billion worth of investments for over 2 million clients globally. Now, I personally use Fidelity's investment platform to run my own 80/20 investment portfolio, and that's for a couple of reasons. A, because they're cost effective, and B, because they have access to ETFs, investment trusts and unit trusts. For those of you out there who are looking for ideas of where to invest your ISA allowance this season, then Fidelity offer a range of guidance and fund shortlists, and they also offer fund suggestions from their investment director Tom Stevenson, whose name you may recognise because he also writes for The Telegraph. Now, you can find out more information about Fidelity and all of those fund shortlists at fidelity.co.uk. But for now, on with this week's show.
Hello and welcome to episode 208 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert as always, Damien Fay, and me, Andy Leeks. Damien, welcome back. How you doing, buddy?
I'm good. I'm really excited this week, Andy. I mean, I know I am often excited and excitable, but there's quite a lot that we've got going on that is a reason to be excited. So one of them is you.
Yeah, I'm super excited too.
Yeah, Andy, for those of you who missed the episode just before Christmas where I announced the fact that Andy, a long friend and separately to that, supporter of Money to the Masses and all we do, and of course you know and love him from this podcast, but Andy is now coming to work full time at Money to the Masses with me and the rest of the gang. So you'll see Andy and hear Andy much more, pictures of him, social media, and it's brilliant because we can then really kick on, and I'm really excited about it, and I know Andy is as well. So probably apprehensive like anybody starting a new job, but it's going to be awesome.
Just a couple of weeks to go, and I'm going to have to start getting used to not calling you mate anymore and calling you boss, but I'm sure you wouldn't have that.
No, mate will do. So that's exciting. But Andy, coincidentally, I don't know if he actually realises, but he will be joining almost on our 9th birthday at Money to the Masses. So our 9th birthday, from the point at which the first post I ever did, I still remember what that was about. That was about how you could pay less tax on your savings rate. It still exists on the site if you want to go and look for it. That was the first post that we ever put out there, was on the 4th of February 2010. And so I've been doing this for 9 years. Obviously, for the first part, it was just a blog, and it grew and grew and grew into the beast it is today. And when I went on it full time, when I quit my job, if many of you remember, about 5 years ago, and Money to the Masses became the thing you know and love. So that's exciting. So we're going to do lots on social media, and I keep banging on about social media because we're putting a lot of effort into producing social media content that's specific for each of the different platforms. So Instagram, I'm loving at the moment. You'll see stuff on there about what we're doing in the office, things we're launching. So our 9th birthday, and for those of you who remember, I started this after my first daughter was born. I was on paternity leave, came back, had a cup of coffee with my brother, who also works at Money to the Masses, and one of the other directors there. We sat down. He was working in a different industry, and altogether not money. And the idea of me writing stuff for people to help them in an altruistic fashion was born. And then that progressed and snowballed and turned into Money to the Masses. So we're going to have a cake, all other things going on. And of course, the other thing, I'm hogging this beginning part, sorry Andy, I'm also launching our Money MOT this week. It's going live to the world, so have a look at the site this week. You'll see a link to the Money MOT. You'll see social media posts talking about it in simple terms. It will help anybody within 2 minutes get a snapshot of where they are and a rating of their finances and how they improve it, where they need to improve, prioritise it, and it will also give them a plan if they register to be able to improve that score they have, from everything from budgeting to bills to insurances, investing, pensions, you name it, it's included. It's a bit of a life passion that's come together to produce this. And one of the key things I always forget to mention, an important factor of this Money MOT, was that it had to be relevant to anybody despite where they are. So if you were a single mum renting a house, if you're a student, if you're a millionaire, somebody who's incredibly wealthy who has lots of properties or whatever it is, there's no point having something that's going to give them a rating if it was only based upon how rich they are. And now that's the way the old world worked. That's the old money. That's the way the city works. They prefer people who have money. This is about giving people, are they doing the best they can do given where they are in life and the resources they have. So that's why somebody who could be a student could get an A grade, and somebody who could have lots of money could get a D grade, and it's actually relative. So I won't talk too much more because you're going to have lots of this over the coming weeks, and I'm going to obviously major on it, but I'm very excited, Andy.
Excellent stuff. And let's tell the listeners then what's coming up on this week's pod.
Right, again, some great interactions from people out there. People are getting in touch. 2 pieces. One of them is solely inspired by one of you listeners, and actually somebody who came to our podcast meetup. Do you remember when we took over part of a pub? And we had a whole load of people rock up and meet us for a beer. We're going to do more of that in 2019. I think I'm really excited about it because I think people are also very keen. No one's doing this in the world of money, going out and meeting people and doing live events. And I'd really like to. So keep getting in touch if you'd like us to do one near where you are, and we'll try and do that.
I think you were playing that down a little bit as well, Damien. When you said we took up a part of a pub, what people might not realise is this is possibly one of the largest pubs in southern England, and we probably took up about a quarter of it. So don't get that thought in your mind of that local pub down the road and there were 4 people sitting in the corner. We are talking, there was about, 80 people there that were taking over this 500 people pub. It was massive.
Yeah, so it was good fun, and we want to do that again. And Sarah, who came to that event and often writes to us and asks things, suggests things, and she has inspired a whole piece. I'm almost going to give it over to Sarah, and Andy's going to read out what she sent in. And it's about how you can make £700 of free money from banks, and it's how she did it. So that is a brilliant piece. I'm also going to talk about actively managed SIPs. Now, this was a question I've been asked by a reader who, I say a reader, he's also a podcast listener, about somebody who wants to give over their SIP to somebody to run for them, but in a way wants them to be able to follow short-term changes in stock markets, not just focus on the long term. And do I know anyone who does that? So I'm going to talk about that. And finally, I'm going to talk about compound interest, but also a trick to boost your pension. The compound interest element was something that somebody wanted to have more content on. They suggested that by Instagram, so I'm going to do that, Andy. But I'm going to say this week, let's start with the free £700 because I'm going to give the floor over to Andy. I've done enough talking, and Sarah, because Andy's got Sarah's lengthy email, which is actually a kind of a how-to of what she did, and Andy's going to just read it through.
Good, yeah, so Sarah got in touch, and I'm going to read it out as it is, and it might almost be worth putting this down in print somewhere. Maybe I'll put it in the podcast description, because reading it out might not give it full justice, because there's a very logical step-by-step process to this, so maybe we'll do that. But here we go. So Sarah says, "Hey guys, I haven't contacted you for a while, so I just thought you might want to revisit the fact that people can get free money from bank switching and churning the high interest rates on certain accounts." So Sarah goes on to say, "I have literally sat here on my phone whilst watching TV, opening up an HSBC switching account for my husband, and from that he will get £150. I then went on to open up a NatWest switching account. Sarah herself says that she can't do the HSBC one, as she's actually already taken advantage of that last year and already got the dosh for that, so she says. So she's going to get £150 in addition on her NatWest switching account. Sarah goes on to say, "I opened up another regular high saving interest account in my normal bank, which offers 5% return. My last year's high interest account just matured, so I then got £98 in an interest payment. Plus, I had paid in £300 a month. So I've got a total of £3,600 plus the interest. So with that £3,698, she's going to send it over to her husband's HSBC's new switching account, for which she earned £150, to churn that into another 5% interest in a year's time, thus getting another £98. Plus she'll start then contributing to a new 5% interest account in her own account to get, again, another £98. Sarah goes on to write, her husband can then, if they have another spare £300, contribute to a regular saving account, giving again 5% interest on his account, thus getting £98 at the end of the month. The end result, by sitting down whilst watching TV, she adds, and speaking to no person at all at any banks, she'll make £150 from the HSBC switch, £150 from the NatWest switch, £98 from last year's 5%, £98 from the churned 5% account, £98 from the new 5% account in Sarah's name, and potentially another £98 from her husband's new 5% account. So if you're keeping track of all that, you've possibly lost track, but you get the idea. Sarah's going in, she's opening up these new high interest savings accounts, she's putting money straight in there, regular savings, earning the 5% maximums. And so at the total at the end of that, £594, and potentially an extra £98 if her husband can find the extra cash each month to put in and maximise that 5%, which would total £692.
We'll call that £700 between friends, Andy. So I would give you a round of applause and Sarah a round of applause on that one, because it may sound like what was going on there and hard to grasp, and Andy did a brilliant job of reading that through, but I'll quickly explain it just to summarise it. What Sarah was doing, there are regular savings accounts out there. Nationwide do one, First Direct do one, where if you pay a regular amount in each month, they can pay you an amount of interest that equates to about 5%. So it's a pretty decent amount, but of course it's a regular savings account. So normally after a year, some of these accounts may mature, which is what Sarah was saying. She was actually paying regular money into an account anyway, somewhere, and getting 5%. If you go onto moneytothemasses.com, we have Best Buy tables under the comparison tab where you can see some of these regular savings accounts, and of course there are these high interest current accounts that are out there, so you can do that. You can pay regular amounts in. So what Sarah was doing was, one of those accounts was maturing, she was just taking out another one, so she was continuing getting that 5% going on that regular amount she was paying in. But what she also was doing, banks are so keen to get your current account because they can make money from you by doing it, is they're offering you some real sweeteners. And just to run through, I'll list a couple of them. First Direct do one that is £150 if you switch your current account with them, and that's via Money Saving Expert, because they have done some in the past where sometimes the amounts vary, but that's a deal they're doing at the moment. £125, not £150, £125. NatWest do one which is £150, and they give you 2% back on your bills. And you'll hear the paper flicking here because I'm just listing off the others. HSBC, as Sarah mentioned, do £150 up front, and finally Halifax do a £50 up front if you switch. Now, I've just rattled through those. You can go to each of those different banks, and what you will find is that there are caveats to each of those. So sometimes it's caveats about how many direct debits you have to have coming out of the account. It could be 2 a month, or it could be you have to pay a certain amount in a month. What Sarah has done is use the money that she has from certain accounts and that's actually moving them into those new accounts. So she's opening up and getting those Brucey bonuses. So she's doing it for herself and her husband. So you can see you can quickly double up on some of those £125 bonuses, and you can then see how you can quickly get to the £700 amount. Plus she's getting some good interest on her regular savings. But of course, as there are caveats, you have to be mindful of them, and some of them are that you end up having to pay a certain amount of money in. So let's say £1,000 and you think, I don't have £1,000, I've only got 500. It is possible on some of these accounts to just take that £500 and move it from one bank to another bank and then move it back again to the first one, and that counts as paying £1,000 in because it's cumulative, and you've triggered the caveats, the minimum payments on each of those different accounts. So I know people who have done a merry-go-round where they will have £1,000 or £500 that literally is bouncing from one account to another all month, doing that just so they make sure they meet the minimum payments, and therefore they will get the cashback offers from each of those banks. And equally, and Sarah mentions it I think in her email, is that to beat the minimum number of direct debits, she just uses direct debits for small amounts of things that she's not really bothered about. So it may be something that's only very small, she only has to put a very small amount in there to maintain enough money so the direct debits don't bounce. So you can do it. Sarah's just proved it, and that's why I wanted to really cover it, just to highlight that Sarah did it in basically an ad break. Any of us can do it. Those 4 banks and building societies that I mentioned have some great offers, and all you have to do is be mindful of the caveats. If you want to see a good example of some of this, then Money Saving Expert do have a page where they actually tell you, they list the caveats out so you don't have to go and try and work them out, and what you need to do to basically beat the system. So well done Sarah, well done Andy. Before we move on, Andy, I just wanted to quickly mention 80/20 Investor. Now, 80/20 Investor is my DIY investment service. Do go and check it out. I empower and teach people how to invest their own money. The service provides data-driven fund tables. The data is driven by my own unique 80/20 investor algorithm, which I created. You also get stop-loss alerts, you get research articles and insights, you get market commentaries, monthly commentaries and DIY investment lessons, but you also get access to my £50,000 portfolio, which is a portfolio of my own money, which I run live on the site for members to see, and it shows people how I use the service to maximise my returns. And in the first 2 years of doing so, I turned £50,000 into £59,500, which is a 19% return, beating investment managers, professional fund managers, financial advisors, investment banks, passive trackers in the market. So everybody can have a free 30-day trial of 80/20 Investor, and you can claim that by going to moneytothemasses.com and going and clicking on the 80/20 Investor hyperlink at the top of the page. So go and try the service. Let me know what you think of it, and I know from the feedback that you're going to love it. But for now, on with the show.
Okay, so we're moving on to pensions, and you had a question from a listener and a reader of the site about SIPs, actively managed SIPs, and on what can be done.
Yeah, I mean, before I jump into this, because it's related, I mean, please give us feedback on the Midweek Markets podcast. I hope you all are still enjoying that, because I'm enjoying making it, and there's a lot going on in the investment world that is very timely, which we don't necessarily want to cover in these podcasts, because we like these to be evergreen, so somebody can listen to this in 2 years' time and still gain value, which is what a lot of you do. You go through our back catalogue. This question relates to somebody who's trying to take advantage of short-term changes in markets. So I'll just read through the email again, so it's my turn to do the reading, Andy. I probably won't do it as well as you did, but this person has said for the past 2 years they've had over 100,000 in a SIP, supposedly actively managed by, I won't name the company in case they don't want me to, without as yet entering drawdown. So drawdown is where they're going to start taking an income from that pension pot. The results have not been inspiring, minus 5% or 2.5% per annum. So basically they're down, or they've made very little money. Now, I believe the portfolio manager, well known and respected, has chosen a spread of funds that alter very little, despite the US market rising in 2017 and recent world/UK equity market falls, which he then refers to something I once wrote about that he's read, talking about the herd mentality and stock markets, etc. He's been looking at various managed options, but none inspire me to move the fund. 3 to 6 monthly rebalancing might seem dynamic, but could be that much behind valuation-driven, emerging, evolving momentum and smart money trends affecting asset class mix and geographical distribution. I differentiate this from short-term speculation. I do recall in one of your communications last year, you emphasised that if conditions for certain asset classes deteriorate, you would go substantially into cash or safer assets for an appropriate period of time. No conventional fund manager has suggested this. Might this affect their commission? Interesting question. Now, just so people realise that at the back end of last year, my own 50k portfolio did go into cash at its height, about 30%. That was then reduced down to about 20, which is roughly, I think, where it is now. So the market plummeted as we headed into December. I missed all that. So, like I said to you in the previous podcast, I think it was, that I was obviously quite happy about that. Not the market fell, but I'd missed out on that. On the flip side, the market has now rebounded and we've had one of the best Januaries on record, so my portfolio won't have benefited from a large portion of that. But when you do that V-shaped bounce, we're basically back where we were. So you could argue you've missed out on the fall, but you've missed out on the gain, and you're kind of net neutral. That is one of the things that holding cash, that encapsulates both the positive and the negatives of having a position where you try and manage risk. But that's what I was doing, I'm managing risk, and that's important. It's the downside. So was the upside potential there versus the downside? So in that environment, based around momentum, and there weren't really many positive options out there, and we're still in a period where the market is trying to push higher, but it's if you listen to the Midweek Markets podcast, it's still stuck in this slight range bound trading, and it needs to just kick on if it's going to push back to new all-time highs and actually negate that downside we've had since October, because we are still technically just in a downtrend, but we've had some spectacular rallies in the market since the December lows. But of course, if we are in a bear market, which is a market which will fall by about 20%, these things are only known in hindsight. If we're in those, some of the strongest rallies in stock market occur in bear markets, in downward markets. So we will never know whether we're in a bear market or still in a bull market until we have the benefit of hindsight. But the point is that managing risk is what you want to do. So the risks, if they're to the downside, you give up the potential of a rally, missing out, but you're mitigating the potential of the downside. So that's where cash comes in. So do many managers do that? Well, not really, because one of the reasons is they worry about the fear of missing out. Also, as this reader alluded to, there are constraints on them. Some of it is because they are paid to invest. So if they don't invest, then you wonder what they're doing, because you're just paying them very expensive fees to hold money in cash. Also, there is that element of they might not make money. If it's a service that generates money from actively trading and managing your funds in any way. I know this reader did say that they're not trying to game the system as such, that they're trying to differentiate themselves from short-term speculation. But one thing I would say, they are looking to start to draw down on their pension. And one of the problems is, if you're trying to draw down and generate income, so from natural income, that's like dividends, or take out chunks of yours to boost that income, so taking capital, if you keep investing and you're starting to chase performance a bit, momentum, there is a danger that if you get it wrong, then, or it's not necessarily wrong, the momentum suddenly changes. So let's say it happened at the back end of, or at the start of October last year, momentum suddenly changed, then you can be on the wrong side of that and you don't have the time to recover. So what I'm trying to say is, if I was at the point where I was looking to take an income, it's a personal view of course, I would be using momentum far less, if at all, just because I'd be wanting to take far less risk, because what's more important is actually producing an income and having something that can. So we talked about in the past about equity income portfolios, where you're not so bothered about the capital values moving up and down. You're more bothered about the sustainability of the income it produces, whether the funds produce reliable payouts year after year, and that would need the companies they invest in to provide reliable dividends. So you're not bothered so much about the capital change in the portfolio, because you're not taking chunks of it out. You're just living off the income it produces. So I suppose I've heard analogies in the past, a bit like a heart that's pumping blood around a body. It's all about just its pumping. The heart changes size, a bit like a portfolio can change size, get bigger and smaller. It's all about the fact that it's pumping this income, so pumping blood. That's one analogy I've seen used in the past. Not perfect, but it kind of works. So this person who's trying to make the most of market changes that in a much shorter time frame, I think that the only issue I'd have with doing that at their point is that you are likely, because you're trying to encash capital value, you're likely to impact your ability to produce an income. And it's almost like once you get to a certain point in life and you've got to your pot of money and you're at that point, you're producing an income, the pot you've got is not going to, it's more about conservation than growing, because you're actually already starting to take money from it. So in this position, yes, you could have a satellite part of your portfolio that you're actually using to maybe focus on momentum, that you can afford to keep invested for a longer time because you don't need it to produce an income from or take chunks from. I get that. That's fine. But the rest of it, I wouldn't really go down this road. Now, do I know someone who will actively manage that? No, I don't. Not somebody who won't want to charge quite a bit of money, because most managers won't dynamically change the funds that they pick, because they will tend to pick things based not around momentum, because you can apply momentum yourself. That's what 80/20 Investor is kind of built around, teaching people they can do that themselves without actually paying a manager a lot of money to do, because you can use algorithms that are out there like 80/20 Investor to judge momentum. So one option would be you could go and get a stockbroker to pick a range of investments for you, so direct shares. It'll be quite risky. It's likely you've got an increased chance of losing your money and therefore not being able to produce the income you need. So I'm not going to suggest anybody, because I don't think there really is anybody out there who won't charge you a lot for it, and also who will succeed. I think that's the other thing. I think short-termism and trying to market time does have, no one has ever really been proven to be successful at it. It's always a long-term game. So one of the most telling points in this article, there was a second part which I didn't read out, which basically said they want to reflect upon relative short-term outlooks on income and dividends and capital gains that they can draw upon without necessarily eroding their capital base in real terms. And I just think that that isn't that likely. So unfortunately, I haven't got the answer to this question other than giving insight into how I would do things differently. So every now and then we all do want something that doesn't really exist. People may promise you that they can do it. I do feel that anybody who does, I'd question that you've got to see evidence they've done it in the past.
Okay, so carrying on the pension theme, we're going to finish up with the one trick to boost your pension. What have we got?
Yeah, this was something that I saw that stuck out. There was a person on Instagram, and I apologise, I didn't make a note of your handle that I could have read it out, but they wanted to know more about compound interest, and it's something I'll come back to do more examples, because it's quite a powerful concept. People who are mathematicians would have called it the eighth wonder of the world or universe, and compound interest is just that ability for snowballing. So it's quite timely. The world is going bananas about the fact it might snow today. The idea that if you just keep rolling a snowball, eventually it gets bigger, and it gets bigger at a rate that accelerates. So when it rolls down here, that hill, that ball gets bigger and bigger, snowballing. That's what compound interest is. So you're earning interest not just on your initial amount, but on the interest you've already earned, so that grows quickly. There was a piece that I saw, was titled very catchily, "The Pension Secret Which Could Boost the Retirement Funds of Millions Without Contributing More." So how could you boost your pension fund without contributing more? What they actually said, and it's something we touched upon, I can't tell you which podcast it was, but about the dangers of default funds. So when we're in auto-enrollment schemes, or you have a pension scheme of some kind, the kind of default funds you end up in, they actually have been shown to underperform others. So if you keep reviewing your portfolio regularly, you have a better chance of actually getting a better return. So the idea of this piece was that rather than just accept whatever fund you're dumped in, go and look at what your options are and put a bit of work in and a bit of research. And then if you can pick a better fund that will get a better return, you haven't had to put any more money in, it's just making your money work harder. Now that's obviously, you'll sit there and be going, right, okay, that's brilliant advice, but how do I pick the funds? Of course there are best buy lists that are out there. Okay, I know I'm occasionally mentioned that some of the best buy lists that you see on investment platforms, you have to question how they're picked. But on the whole, they're not a bad bunch of funds. Of course, you've got things like 80/20 Investor, which I produce. And there'll be other people out there probably producing similar things, although I've not seen many. I was going to say any as good, but many. I haven't seen many other services out there. But I would also argue that probably the easiest way is just to cut down the charges you pay. And if you go and Google how much should I pay into my pension, or I think the title was off the top of my head, how to get a £25,000 a year pension on just, I think it was £80 a month. If you search something like that on Money to the Masses, you will find an article I produced a couple of years ago which explained how you could get a decent pension by paying in very little, and it was doing all the little tweaks. One of them was to boost investment returns, but that was basically by taking more risk, because you don't know the funds that are going to work. You could just invest in slightly more risky funds if you've got a longer time frame. That article explains it very nicely, but the reason I mentioned this piece, because they do have a table in there, and I forget who did this. It was one of the platforms. I think it might have been Hargreaves. And what they did is they produced a scenario, and this just explains or demonstrates compounding very nicely. Imagine that you're paying 8% into a pension, so nice numbers because it's in line with what auto-enrollment is now. Imagine if you've got an investment return of 5%. That's not outlandish if you're investing in something like equities, and you were paying a charge of 0.75% a year. Then if you invested like that, then if you were age 22 and you were paying in, age 22 and earning £30,000, and you were paying that amount in, and by age 68 they modelled what you'd have, then you would have £186,000 effectively. I'm just rounding it up. By the time you retired in today's money. If you increased your contributions by 1%, so you're putting 9% a year, then you'd have £210,000. So there's about a £23,000 boost to what your pension pot is. If you increased your return by 1%, but kept the contributions still at the 8%, so you're relying on an extra 1% increase in your investment return, then your pension pot would be £242,000. So that's an increase of 55,000. So it's that snowballing effect that happens by getting an extra return on all the money that's in the pot as you get older, rather than just trying to increase your amount you pay in. So that's a powerful demonstration of the effect of compounding. But it also links quite nicely to something I talked about, I don't know when it was, a few podcasts ago, that when you're young, the one action that has the biggest impact on your pension pot size is increasing contributions. When you're older, the biggest impact comes from increasing the return on that existing pot. Because obviously if you're only putting in 2/5 of nothing because you've just started when you're young, it doesn't matter if you make a killing in terms of investment returns. 10% on 2/5 of nothing is still 2/5 of nothing. When you get older, you 10% on 100,000 is £10,000. It's sizable amounts of money. So again, it's that nice, interesting dynamic. So compounding. There you go, Andy.
Good stuff. We're done on another weekend pod. Don't forget, of course, Damien does release the Midweek Markets podcast, which is out every Wednesday. Next episode being episode 4. And keep an eye out for that, because it really does give you a good insight into what's happening real time in the markets, with the weather, with the politics, with everything else. Damien dissects it all and gives you, a bite-sized 15-minute sample of what's going on in the market. So do listen to that.
And the only thing I'll just add to that, Andy, is that I'm kind of, as this series goes on, teaching people stuff as well. So it is very contemporary, but there are bits I'm teaching people about how to set up their stock app on their phone and the sort of dynamics between different investments and indices. So it's a learning curve as well. It's not just factual. It's actually trying to engage people to get them excited. Can I just add one quick thing? I know I'm hogging. We're looking to do more for millennials. Now, I don't like that term, millennial money, but we are going to start trying to do some more stuff on social media for people who are younger. And I know I'm only 40, so I'm not old, but we've got Lauren who's on board now, as some of you may have seen on Instagram. And you can actually email if you want, lauren@moneytothemasses.com. Just so you know, when Andy comes, he'll be andy@moneytothemasses.com. You can see a pattern forming. I just have to employ people with different names. But we, with Lauren, we're going to do stuff around money for people who are of that age group. So in their early 20s, and I think they call it really naff, the Generation X and millennials, because there are things that we won't necessarily cover, and that's not because I don't mean to, it's just that what people ask for, and sometimes you just forget all those different scenarios. We need them in, so the point is, send in questions. If you don't want to send them to me, send them to Lauren, because we're going to start doing videos, and I'm going to actually, me and Lauren are going to be talking, she may appear on them as well, where all those questions, those things that people think, like really silly questions, what is a fund, or what do shares, how do shares work, that stuff is like gold dust, and we want to get those on film and be answering those so everybody can feel engaged with money, not just the people who already listen to the podcast. Because I know occasionally I've had people say to me, I love the podcast, occasionally I'm not sure I understand everything. But that's great, you don't have to understand everything. If you understand something, that is progress, but we want to be able to find out what the bits you don't understand, and we want to get an outlet for those, and that's probably going to be YouTube and Instagram.
Good stuff. So if you want to send any of those questions over to Lauren, you're more than welcome to do so. Lauren@moneytothemasses.com. You can also send emails across to Damien@moneytothemasses.com. On Instagram and Twitter, look them up on Instagram, look for Money to the Masses, and on Twitter it's @moneytothemasses with the number 2. Damien, we're done. Until next time.
Until next time.
Don't forget to claim your free copy of Damien's best-selling book, The 30-Day Money Plan. Sort your finances in just 5 minutes a day, worth $4.99. Just go to moneytothemasses.com/podcast to find out how.